Okay, so we built our first dummy index file with some really trivial content. Let's use some of this knowledge to start actually working on the first assignment. And so we're going to work on the hardest part of the assignment. It will give us a chance to touch on many different little concepts, which we'll come back and talk about in much more detail next week. Right? So we're just going to do a very high level touch on many different little things, and we'll come back and revisit this and do a deep dive later next week. So getting started. So first of all, this is what we're going to be building. We see that we have all sorts of many different components. We have a kind of like a left-hand side list of modules. We have kind of like a right-hand side with a main content. We have on the top, looks like there's tabs. Down below that, looks like we have some pills. These are all navigation mechanisms that allow you to drill down to presumably some kind of hierarchical data structure, right? From courses down to modules, down to lessons, down to topics, down to the actual content. Yes? And the content from the faculty's point of view is just a whole bunch of forms. Yes? All right, so let's try and build this. How can I style this to look something similar to this? I'm going to focus more on the functionality portion of this. I'll let you decide how you actually want to make it look like. Right? I'll leave that up to you. So let's get started. So first of all, we'll need to create a couple of HTML files, right? And maybe a styling CSS file. A couple of best practices here. We are going to be building the course editor template, the HTML file. Now it's a common practice or a best practice that if your file or whatever feature you're building needs several files to work, right? It's often best practice to group those files together, right? There'll be an HTML file that has all the main content, all the layout of what the content is. Plus, typically we'll need a styling sheet that tells me what font I want to use, what color scheme I want to use, right? What some of the look and feel stuff. Yes. So it's a best practice to, if I have several of those files, to put them all under and group them into a dedicated directory for that feature that I'm building. Make sense? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a directory called course editor, and in there I'm going to put the files that I want to work on. So let's do that. So under my web app here, I'm going to create a new directory and call it course editor, right? And these are all techniques for dealing with a ever-growing number of files that I need to deal with, right? And this will grow exponentially, and we'll get out of hand trying to deal with dozens and dozens of files, right? So I need to find a mechanism that allows me to deal with this growing complexity. So I'm going to create a directory, and that everything that I need to do about course editor is under that directory. Okay. Then in here, I'm going to create a file where I'm going to hold my actual HTML file. So in here, we'll call course editor.template.client.html. So one word about the why I chose this name for this file. So usually in a large team, we would choose, we would all agree on some naming convention for our files, right? And how we're going to organize it. Yes. If you've been in a co-op, you might have run into this where your team or your project manager will enforce certain naming conventions. Yes. If you've gone through this, please feel free to challenge this naming convention or maybe use your own. If you haven't, then use my naming convention. Right. So the naming convention here is that the first part of the name is the feature I'm working on, right? And the feature is the course editor, right? So course dash editor. I'm using dashes between the words. Then I'm using dots to separate the different roles of these files. What is this file doing? So the role of this file is to provide some HTML template content. Yes. Oftentimes the content in here is typically oftentimes snippets of small little HTML that it can be reused to create larger HTML files, right? This one is going to be a full-fledged page, right? Then .client tells me that this file is being is run or is being executed or is being interpreted by the client side of my application. So presumably my application will be broken up into multiple pieces. There will be the client that is rendering for for human consumption. There will be a middle tier that will give me some business logic and access to a database, and then there will be the database itself. So this particular file, right, is meant to be interpreted by the client side. That's what that client tells me. Yes. So presumably, as a developer, by just looking at the name of the file, I can immediately position myself. Where am I in the architecture of my application? So, ooh, I'm working on something on the client. Yes. Right. So this naming convention helps me, helps me and perhaps other folks that are joining the team to immediately position themselves, conceptually. Where are they in this large application? Everybody okay? All right. So in this client HTML, we have noticed that we already have a boilerplate content for this. We have already the HTML. We have the head. We have the body. And in the head, you'll notice that we have a title, right? So the title is part of the head. Remember, the head is where we put some meta information about the whole document, like who the author is, when it was created, any dependencies that this file will have with other files, things like that. One of the most common things to put in here is the title. The title is what gets displayed at the top of the window, right? When you visit this HTML document. Notice that if I save that and I go back to my browser, here's my browser. I can ask now for that document. It'll be what's it called? Course editor. Oh, did I type it already? There it is. So it looks like it found it. See this title here, right here on the tab. Right, that comes right from this title right here. Okay, so if I change this to be course editor, course editor, save. And I go back and I refresh. Notice that it says course editor at the top of the window. See that? It's a very very generic description, right? Actually, search engines use this, right, as a way to categorize what it is that they're looking at, right? So that you should really think about this title very carefully, right? Because search engines will will use this as a clue, right, to try to understand what's the overall description of the whole document, right? What else? In here in the body, we can put some content. We can say that this is the course editor. Save that. I can go back and refresh. There's my course editor, right? Whatever I type in there. It's very common to break up a document into different sections. Maybe a main section and then maybe some subsections. Looks like we have that structure in what we want to build. Let's see. Let's put this together near each other. If I go back, we do have a couple of sections that we could break it up into, right? We have like the overall course editor. Looks like we have on the left-hand side maybe like a list of modules, and on the right-hand side we have like a list of lessons. Let's break it up into that, right? So let's create those two sections, those different sections. So my first section is the course editor. Then we have the module list. And then we have the lessons. If I go back and re-render this, notice that it just renders from left to right, okay? And it's not listening to any of my new lines and my tabs. All my white spaces are being ignored, okay? And that's the default behavior of the browser, unless you specifically specify a style or a format or how is it that you want me to render it, right? I'll just ignore all the white spaces, all right? Everything will flow from left to right, from top to bottom, right? Unless you specify any additional styling. So let's do that. Let's specify a couple of stylings. One of the easiest or simplest stylings is to declare certain things as headings, right? So H1 is the biggest heading, right? A large heading, bold, black, right? It just takes the biggest font, right? So if I do that and save that and I go back and I refresh, notice that indeed it renders in big, bold black letters. Yes, it takes up a large chunk. I can do the same thing with the other two. I can say that these are smaller headings. So the module list is slightly less important than the entire course editor, right? So this is kind of like a subsection. Oops. Okay. So module lists and lessons are kind of like subsections of the overall thing that I am building. So let's save that. Let's refresh. There we go. So we have the main content, and then we have two subsections of what we're building. Everybody good? All right. Excellent. Let's keep going. All right. So we have the course editor. We have the title. We have H1 for the course editor, and we have the module list and the lessons.